Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first of the 4 Ask the Experts community meetings. I'm David Hook. I'm the president of Incorporate Vail, Arizona, and we are so thankful that you were here tonight. We're hosting these meetings because we want to spread the information about incorporation and encourage the incorporation of Vail, Arizona. We believe in the power of dialogue, so we're going to have a dialogue tonight, and diverse perspectives. And we are open to differing opinions and discussions, but we have a strict, no-tolerance policy towards hate speech and personal attacks, and we aim to maintain a safe and constructive space for all participants. So we will take questions tonight, but the questions will be submitted to our people who are collecting questions, and then we'll ask the questions from those cards. And any questions that are submitted that violate the rules of civility will not be considered. We appreciate your understanding and cooperation in upholding these guidelines. And let's all foster a positive and constructive environment together, where everyone feels valued and respected. And we thank you so much for coming out and learning about this and being part of the community. So, I have a brief slideshow that I want to go through. First of all, this is the Ask the Expert community meeting, and our expert tonight, and we'll talk about him a little bit later, is John Flint, who was the first town manager of Weston, Florida, and he was a contract city expert. So why incorporate? Well, we have several reasons why it made sense to incorporate. One is it creates our own destiny. It preserves our lifestyle. We gain control of local government. The taxes we pay remain here. They stay in Vail and they don't go elsewhere, and particularly in Tucson. We also preserve our lifestyle. Residents need to decide. We need to decide how we're going to grow. And we need a safe, livable, and sustainable community. And incorporation allows for responsive and responsible growth. And we gain local control. We get control of the rural, the suburban, shopping, services, recreation, all the stuff that you want for a local community. We get control of it. Incorporation allows for local control on local issues and priorities. Vail has unique issues, a unique history, and unique heritage, which is not always a priority with other jurisdictions, particularly Pima County or Tucson. And as those continue to grow, we may be lost unless we are incorporated. I always tell a friend of mine that we have as much history here as Tombstone has over in Tombstone. We keep our taxes here. Our sales and our income taxes currently go to Arizona General Fund. They come back to Vail when we incorporate. Right now, they don't come back to us. But when you incorporate, all those taxes that are collected on our behalf then come to Vail. And we get to put our tax dollars to work in our community. We do have a map that shows all the annexations that Tucson has done over the very many last years. You probably saw this in the Vail Voice. But Tucson continues to annex because the only direction they can go is east and a little bit south. But if we do not incorporate, they will find a way to either go through us or go around us, and Vail will get lost. The Cody, Gabriel, and Jay annexations are currently underway. Those are City of Tucson annexations in areas that we believe are Vail. One of the questions that everybody asks is it feasible to become our own town because the town is expensive? We've done our own town budget. It's online. But basically, we would get those state shared revenues. Those state shared revenues are greater than what is needed to run a town at its minimum condition. So there would be at the end of each year a fund balance of right here $2.78 million that we can either save or we can use for our own government. So we've been following this 8-step process of incorporation. The first step was in community engagement. We went out and we met with all the community members. Then we did an assessment. Is it feasible for us to be our own town? And then we met and we decided, yes, it is feasible to be our own town, so we're moving forward. So we started getting the information out there. We built a website. We started producing all the information And then we went through this incredibly challenging legal procedure to get on the ballot. And the issue of incorporation is getting more and more complicated because people want those dollars that go to incorporated areas. And so there's a lot of competition there. So it's increasingly more difficult to jump through all the hoops to even get to the ballot. And so we've spent the last 9 months jumping through all those hoops, getting all the permissions, talking to all the right people, developing the boundary, and doing all of that. And believe it or not, we were able to follow all that. We did a petition drive. In 28 days, we collected more than enough signatures that we needed to collect. We submitted that to Pima County, and they have now allowed us to be on the ballot. So we are going to be on the ballot on November 7th, and we are now heavily involved in a campaign. And the purpose of the campaign, obviously, is to just inform people what it means to incorporate, because it is so incredibly complicated. Even this week, I had a conversation with someone explaining the complications of incorporation. It just makes your mind swim. But the bottom line is, do you want to be a town or not? I mean, the bottom line is, do you want Vail to be a town, which is feasible, and 91 other cities and towns across Arizona do it, or do you just not want Vail to be a town? And if you don't want Vail to be a town, then someday Vail will go away. It'll be a thing of the history and of the past. And then step 8 is the town formation, and that happens. There are a few things that happens if on November 7th when the vote is favorable. Then the Pima County Board of Supervisors certifies the election results. Then the Pima County Board of Supervisors appoints an interim town council. That council will select their own mayor from within the council. They will organize the administration, the attorneys, they'll negotiate all the intergovernmental agreements. And then one of the main things that interim town council will do is that they need to hold an election for the mayor and council. And so that will happen in 2024. And July 1st is when the vote's positive on November 7th, then we would start our own town on July 1st, 2024. And that brings a whole nother set of rules and regulations that are required for that. That is the formation of the town. All right, so with that being said, we have brought with us tonight somebody that I think that you're going to very much enjoy. And I'm just going to go find my notes on him right here. All right, this is John Flint. Our first expert is John Flint, who's the former city manager, chief executive officer of Weston, Florida. Now, Weston is located on the west edge of Broward County, which also includes Fort Lauderdale, and it's part of that huge Miami metroplex. In 1993, Mr. Flint was elected to the Board of Supervisors of the Indian Trace Community Development, and that ultimately led to the creation of the city of Weston. And John was then appointed as Weston's first city manager in July of 1997. Now, Weston is a very unique and famous city. Why, you may ask? Because the city has a population of 67,000 residents over 27 square miles. And the whole town operates through contracted services of both private and public providers. In other words, the whole city of Weston only has 10 full-time employees. At the beginning of Vail's journey, we reached out to the current mayor, Peggy Brown, and she confirmed that Weston still, when we reached out to her, had 10 full-time employees. And at that time, she said she'd be more than happy to share her experience with our team and with the residents of Vail once incorporated. But it turns out that the brains behind the whole operation was this man here, John Flint. He was the one that guided Weston into this unique form of government that has garnered international acclaim. And if that's not enough, John is also a graduate of the University of Arizona. He continued his education at Harvard and the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School, but he now lives a peaceful life outside of the demands of government in Marana with his wife, Sandy. We are so grateful that he's offered to share his experience here tonight, and we'll let him share a bit about his experience in Weston and then you will have the opportunity to ask him questions. So, would you please give a warm Vail welcome to John Flint.
Well, thank you for that nice introduction. I greatly appreciate it, and it's a pleasure to be with you all this evening and to see the turnout. Let me just put this down here. Like the pastor said, I'm a very proud graduate of the University of Arizona in 1972. I left Tucson to go on to graduate school and to go on to my career. But after experiencing and cleaning up from Hurricane Andrew, Hurricane Wilma, and Hurricane Irma, I said I had enough and I was coming home to Arizona. And I am thrilled to be here. We built our house in Marana in 2018, and I retired in 2019 and moved here permanently. And very happy to be here and very happy to be in Vail this evening. Talking about incorporation, that while you may have read a little bit about Weston, and we were built primarily by one developer and annexed an area next to us, we have a lot in common between Weston and Vail. That we looked at incorporation for the same reasons. One was recognizing that the taxes that we were sending to both the state and to the county governments, we weren't getting back an equal amount of services in return. And that difference could be a big improvement in the quality of life of the residents of Weston, and I'm sure of Vail too. The other thing was to get control of planning and zoning. And these are things which you had up on the screen. Same thing that, do you want big box stores? Do you want car dealerships? Do you want CBD stores? What do you want and how do you want it? At the time, we had to go downtown to the county seat of Fort Lauderdale, just like you have to go to downtown Tucson to deal with those issues. We wanted to be able to deal with them locally. And if you look at it from a numbers standpoint, in Pima County, you've got 5 members of the Pima County Commission, but a population of about 1 million in Pima County. So just do the math of what the ratio is, 1 for however many. And if you want to reduce that, which we did, we have a 5-member city commission in Weston. I mean, you do the math, we're a population of 70,000, and it's the elected officials who are responsible to you as residents are therefore a lot more accessible, and they're going to be far more understanding when you tell them about your concern for an intersection within the city versus them thinking of an intersection throughout the county and all the way halfway to Yuma. So, we've got those similarities, even though I'm here in a jacket and tie, and I'm the guy, as they say, from out of town, so to speak. The reasons are the same. We went through the same process. We had, fortunately, you just had to get the Pima County Commission to go along in the city of Tucson. We had to craft a bill and get it through the Florida State Legislature to be able to hold the referendum for incorporation. So in some respect, it's a little bit easier and more local for you all to do that. But the things that we came up against in the onset of incorporation was there's always an opposition to whatever you do. So let's just get that out there and do that, because when I drove in here, I saw the signs to vote for Vail. I saw a sign that was opposed to it. Okay, fine. So we got that off the table. And we had the same thing, because we had people who were claiming that we wanted to build an empire. We wanted to hire lots of employees. We were doing this for self-gratification or whatever. And yes, those arguments can be made. But the fact is that when you look at the financial issues and you look at the planning and zoning issues, you have to confront them and recognize that having local control is better than not having local control. Now the question is that are you willing to pay the cost of that local control and just what is it? Your people that have been working on this have done an outstanding job. You saw just a preview of the budget, but I went through your incorporation feasibility study and looked at your budget, and it has all the same things that we went through to show that we were sending more money out of the area than we were getting back in services. Now, at the time when we were looking at incorporation, there were those people who were providing services under the county government that were concerned that they were going to lose their jobs, thinking that we were going to start our own police department, start our own fire department, and start our own sanitation or what have you. And we made the commitment to them early on that if we incorporated, we would give them the first right of refusal to continue to perform services under contract to us. So in effect, that sort of neutralized the folks on the fire side, neutralized the folks on the law enforcement side, and a number of other folks. And that was pretty much the impetus for going to the contract style of management. And some people who said we had a contract form of government, no, we still had a democratic form of government. We had a contract style of management, though, that we did that. And when I left, and to this day, there's approximately 45 contracts that provide the services, and we have 10 full-time employees that manage all of those contracts in their various disciplines to do that. And since I left last year, they added 2 more employees, so they're up to 12 now. But all those people are senior management who manage the contracts. And we had some issues along the way with the contracts. I'll be very candid and say back in 2013, we had an investigation by the Broward County Office of Inspector General who found that there was some misdeeds going on, at whatever level you want to call it. But anyway, we had a tree trimming contractor who was billing at the highest rate for trimming trees when he should have been billing at the prescribed rate for the contract. We ultimately sued that contractor and got back approximately $250,000 in overbillings. Also found that the employee that was in charge of the contract was using the vehicle of the tree trimming contractor and residing in a home of another contractor, so he was immediately discharged. But that's all a matter of public record, that's all online. And what I want to say about it is, because that was brought to our attention, we vastly improved our contracts because of that. We're on our 3rd generation contracts, and they are a model for many other cities across the country to use for that, because I tried to make them ridiculously easy to deal with. But what we found with contracting for services, and one example is that I'll take the Broward County Sheriff's Office, is that when we were unincorporated, they were there by right because state law, as it is in Arizona, as it is in the unincorporated areas, the sheriff of the county must provide law enforcement services for it. When we went to the contract with the sheriff, there was a whole change in culture there because now they knew that they were there by invitation and no longer by right. And we developed such a great relationship with the sheriff's office because of that contract and understanding the parameters and the level of service that we wanted. And that transcended through all of our other contracts too, because all those other contract providers knew that there was somebody else we could go to also. But I will tell you, on all of our contracts, with the exception, of course, of law enforcement and fire rescue, all of the contracts were put out to competitive bid, and they were awarded to the most responsive entity that provided the lowest cost. So there was nothing that said we want to go with this person, we want to go with that company, whatever. It was totally transparent, and it worked. Now you say, what's going to happen when we get in a jam and these contractors are going to show up for us? And I will tell you, when we had Hurricane Wilma in 2005, We didn't have to call anybody. They all showed up because of their loyalty to us and because of how we treated them as a service provider. And we treated them as if they were part of our family. To do that as long as they performed. So what did that all transcend into as dealing as a city manager? If you look at a typical municipal budget, and this goes for any municipal budget, whether it's in Florida or Arizona or anywhere else, the largest number generally in a traditionally managed city is going to be personal services, which are the employees and their benefits. And generally that number is going to take up somewhere between 70 and 80% of the budget. And I've always said that the budget is a reflection of how the city manager spends his time. By contracting for services as a city manager, I was able to spend my time with the residents of the city, with the staff in the city, with the elected officials of the city, because I wasn't managing people, I was able to manage the city. And I think that made all the difference in the world in our success in the city of Weston. One of the things that you're going to have to confront, should you choose to incorporate, is how you want the culture of the new organization to exist. And one of the things that I would tell my staff and I would tell our residents, and if you all recall, back in the 90s, customer service was the big buzzword. Everything was about customer service. And I always told our staff, and I told our residents, and I told our elected officials, I said, we don't have customer service. And they all looked at me as if I was crazy. What do you mean you don't have customer service? I said, no. I said, we have shareholder service. Because there's a difference. A customer makes a purchase and leaves, walks out the door. A shareholder makes an investment and stays and expects a return on that investment. And that was our responsibility, was to grow the property value, to help businesses succeed. So over time they could recognize, because of how we were managed and what we did for them, they had growth, whether it was in their property value of their home or in the value of their business. And in Marana, Terry Roseman, the town manager there, has 5-star service. You've got to decide, if you choose to incorporate, what kind of culture you're going to want to instill in the community to make it successful, because without a good positive culture, you're never going to attain the ultimate potential that this community has within it. So I've probably rambled on a little bit enough, but feel free to ask me anything. There's nothing that's off the table.
Why don't you have a seat? I had a few questions I just wanted to ask, just to clarify, and then we'll bring out a couple other people. So you mentioned that it's a contract, and that it all started because you wanted to maintain the contracts that the other organization had that preceded the town of Weston. So that kind of answers that question. Do you think are there other cities and towns around the United States that do contract government?
Yeah, I'll tell you, there are other cities and towns that do it. We really haven't found anybody to the extent that we do it, but Sandy Springs is an example. They incorporated about 10 years after we did, and they came down and looked at us, and one of the people from the incorporation committee actually wrote a book about the incorporation that gives credit to Weston for their style. But Sandy Springs went and created their own police department, their own fire department, and they've got several hundred employees. And they gave initially, I don't know where they are at this moment, but initially they contracted with one entity to manage all of the affairs of the city, and that entity, which at the time was CH2M Hill, subcontracted out some of the other things that, I thought our process was a little better, a little more transparent than what they did, but that's what they choose to do up there. There was a city out in California, the name escapes me, but back in the late 50s, early 60s, did some contracting also.
You mentioned that you were still using Broward County Sheriff Department. What did you see was the advantage for Weston in that department as opposed to just having Broward County do the sheriff stuff anyway?
Well, the contract with the sheriff's office enabled us to specify the level of service that we wanted, which under when we were unincorporated, we immediately had almost double the size. But we were able to institute a number of programs that otherwise wouldn't have been instituted by the sheriff. We specified the higher level of service. We put school resource officers in each of the public schools within the city. Currently we have 11 school resource officers serving and one sergeant for them. We specified that the school resource officers would report to the district chief in the city and not to the central school resource officer manager downtown. So those are some of the advantages. The other thing was that when you contract with a larger agency, you get all the resources of that agency. You get the helicopter, you get the SWAT team, you get, all of those other benefits of a larger agency, which if we had our own police department, we would still be reliant on the sheriff for those larger specialty issues. And that would probably be the same, that would hold true in Vail. The other big advantage from a management standpoint for me was that if we had a sheriff's deputy who was serving in the city and they mistreated one of our residents, or we didn't care for how they were doing the job, called the sheriff would like to replace this person, and they were gone. It was the sheriff's issue is to find a new home for them, and we get somebody else. Those of you who are familiar with collective bargaining agreements and progressive discipline would know that first you got to say, well, don't do that again, and then the next time, well, you got a day off this time, and if you really want to get rid of them, it becomes problematic. This made it so that we got people who were there who understood the service that we wanted and how our residents wanted to be treated.
One of the biggest costs of the town is the retirement, right? Because you hire an employee, and then long after they're gone, you're still paying them a lot of money out of the state retirement system. Is there any benefit with contract in that area?
Well, the benefit of the contract is that you're not dealing with a retirement plan for all of if you had employees. But I will proudly tell you that as retired from the city of Weston, I do not get a check from a retirement plan. We had a 401 plan for all the employees and contributed to it every other week, every payday, and all those employees are on their own to make their own retirement. So when I walked out the door, there was no check that was going to follow me every month afterwards. I was done. And so if you look at traditional retirement plans, the example I always give is that you've got George, who is a police officer or firefighter or whatever you want, started with the entity at age 25 and was eligible to retire after 25 years of service. So he retires at age 50 and starts getting his or her retirement. George Jr. comes in and fills that position now because somebody's got to be on the street or on the fire truck or mowing the lawn or whatever. And George Jr. comes in at 25, and George Jr. retires at 50, and now George is 75 and in good health and still going. So now you got two retirees, and now you got George III coming in to fill the position, to be out on the road, drive the truck, whatever it is. So to have that one person there under a traditional plan, you're paying for two more. There are cities in South Florida, and I'm sure there are others all around the country, that are paying in excess of 100% of salary towards retirement to keep their retirement plans funded, and generally they're not totally funded at 100%. It's rare that local government plans are funded at 100%. So you have that liability. By having a contract and putting the employees on 401 plans, you totally do away with the responsibility of having a retirement plan. Now, those of you who have worked in the private sector and have your retirement plans, God bless you all.
So the idea about whether or not a contract type of government or whatever would ultimately be up to the citizens of Vail, because they'll elect the board, they'll elect the mayor, they'll elect the council. And if this was something that somebody wanted to run on, they could say, listen, if you vote for me, then I'm going to push towards a contract government. Would you recommend that type of government for new towns? I mean, it'd be impossible, I think, to go to this for a town that already exists. There's too much entrenched stuff. But, I mean, as a new town starting out, would you recommend this type of government?
You know, I wholly recommend it. And there are ways for existing cities to transition, but in the cities that I've spoken to, it would have to be over time. Because you don't tell somebody who's 2 years from retirement that you're out of a job. From a humanistic standpoint, you just don't do that. So you do it over a period of 10 years to get to that point. I don't know of anybody that's done it fully, but let me give you an example. When prior to me being city manager in Weston, I was a public works director for the city of Cooper City, which is a little to the east of Weston. And it was a little bit smaller, but a very prideful group, just as you all are in Vail. And in the early 80s, you know, environmentalism was really big, and all they wanted to do was plant trees around the city. So they went and planted all these trees around the city. And then son of a gun, the trees grew up, and they had to be trimmed. So we were a traditionally managed city, so we hired a 3-person tree trimming crew, went out and spent whatever it was for an aerial truck and for chipper, and sent them out to trim trees. And it got to the point that we were telling people that we wouldn't be to trim the trees on the street for about 20 months. And I said, you know, this is getting unsustainable in this manner. So I put out a contract for tree trimming, the private sector. And my 3 tree trimmers weren't too happy about that, but I gave them a year. I said, clean up your act, or this is what's going to happen. We put the contract out. We more than doubled the amount of trees trimmed for the same amount of money, and did it in 9 months instead of 12 months. The difference is, you know, when you pay somebody to trim a tree by the hour versus by paying them by the unit to trim the tree, they're going to take as much time as they can if they're paying them by the hour. So that was the whole key to contracting, is paying by the unit where you can do unit costing.
That's so fascinating. So I noticed that your background, see, one of the things about incorporation, everybody wants to know about the money and the funds and how it all works. And even though all the 91 other cities and towns make it work, some people say it wouldn't work in Vail because we're just not smart enough or whatever. But would you, what are like the aesthetic benefits of a town? Like what can a town bring to bear to a community that a county simply doesn't have the resources or the time or the desire to do? Like when you become a town, what are some of the other benefits that happen that maybe get lost in all the financial decisions?
I think some of the benefits are that, just take for example, road maintenance. If you want a higher level of road maintenance, you all have the wherewithal to do that, versus calling the county and saying, look, this road looks terrible, it needs to be done. And the county says, well, it's not on our program, so it's not getting done. Well, if you have your own program, you can make sure it gets done. If you want it, I've always said that the value of a community is in its appearance. And if you want people to have an impression of Vail of what it's like, then you're going to go, and when people get off the interstate, you're going to make a difference there. They're going to know that they entered someplace different. You can set your own landscaping standards, or lack of landscaping standards. It's going to be up to you all to do that, but you're not going to have to depend on the legislation of 5 elected county commissioners to determine the level of service you want or don't want in Vail. And that's the biggest difference. You
you will have the wherewithal to be who you want to be, to look like you want to be, and to make it happen. Whereas your ability to do that now without control of the funding and without control of planning and zoning, you're at the mercy of going to downtown Tucson to the Henry County Commission.
My wife's grandmother used to live in Loveland, Colorado, and they made a conscious decision when they created the town of Loveland to put art sculptures all throughout the whole entire town. And so you walk into Loveland, and it's like, wow, this is really interesting. I mean, is that something that any town, or is it just, are they a unique, special situation because of whatever? Or can any town really say, this is what we're going to make important? We're going to pursue it?
What most towns have now, which we didn't have, but we did it subconsciously and got it done, is communications and branding. And you've got to decide, how you want your brand to be. And I'll tell you in Weston that the signs for all of our buildings, the signs for all of our parks, and the entrance signs into the city were all the same. So you knew that it was the city of Weston that was responsible for that building, for that park, that you were coming into Weston. Because I will tell you, in South Florida, it's very different than here in Southern Arizona, but you can drive up US 1 or State Road 441 or University Drive from the south end of the county to the north end of the county, and I doubt many people could tell you which city you were in at any point during that journey, in that 20-something mile drive. If you want people to know they're in Vail, if you're incorporated, you can make that happen. That's going to be up to you to be able to do that, if that's one of your priorities.
All right, so we've asked the people here that if they want to ask you a question, and you're still able to submit questions if you'd like to, and they'll be brought up. But I think we have some questions that we already have people have filled out. But before we do that, I'm going to invite up Rob Samuelson and Bruce Wright. Bruce Wright is with Wright Associates, and he was the president of Arizona Tech Park, and basically started that whole tech park from scratch, and did a lot of the things that I think a town would do, which is to create an identity and image, and basically allow people to come in. He had to deal with federal government, with state government, with county government, with city of Tucson. He had to deal with all those people. And then Rob Samuelson is our technical advisory chair. He was with PAG for years and was mostly in finance. And you couldn't ask for a better person to come up with a feasibility study than Rob Samuelson. So we're going to see if we have some questions over here. If you could bring those over here, and I will figure out if I should direct these to our team or if I should direct them to you. So here we go. When Weston was first incorporated, how did the council handle zoning?
Yeah, I love that question. And some of my answers I can only relate to it if I tell you a little story, because I think it's going to really help you. When the developer, which at the time was Arvida Corporation, developed this in the city of Weston, they got the Broward County Commission to zone all of their property, what was called PDD, Planned Development District. And the Planned Development District enabled the developer to set the lot sizes based upon the type of product that they wanted to build. So they had some large lots, they had estate lots, they had townhouse lots, they had and everything in between. Well, when we incorporated and we started looking at things, we realized that we inherited the Broward County zoning, which meant we still inherited the PDD districts, the Planned Development Districts. And the light bulb went on, and we said, there were no setbacks in the PDD district because that's what gave the developer flexibility. Meaning that if you owned one of those homes and you came to us and said, I want to build out to my property line, we would have had to give you the permit to do that. So what we did when we got started, I think a couple of years in, we did a master rezoning of the city of Weston, and based upon the products that were built, developed a zoning district where some side setbacks and some products were 5 feet, some were 7.5 feet, some was 10 feet, whatever. Created the zoning districts that fit those products that would protect the integrity of that community, because prior to that, it didn't happen. So it took us a little bit of time, but we rezoned the entire city, and we only had 2 challenges on 2 parcels out of, I think about 17,000, about 24,000 parcels in that, and we were able to manage it. And subsequent to that, we went, and then we took the Broward County Code of Ordinances and created and went through them and jettisoned them and created the City of Weston's own ordinances, and subsequently even updated those over time. And so during my tenure, we rezoned the entire city, which back then people thought we were nuts, and then wrote and then rewrote the entire town code of ordinances.
So Pima County has a zoning code called Pima Prospers, and the whole entire Pima County gets zoned at one time. And I don't think it gets a lot of attention from the residents of Pima County. How engaged are people in a town when you say we're rezoning the town, we're looking at the zoning of the town as opposed to the county?
Well, what we did in Weston, and I know Miranda just started doing this, or Valley already was doing it, is that when there is a rezoning, it's a matter of public notice. And under rezonings in local governments that I'm familiar with, and like I said, that's occurring in Brandon and all around, notice has to be given within a certain perimeter. In our case, it was within 500 feet. We excluded water bodies because we did have a lot of lakes, which we don't have here. Notice also had to be posted on the property, and if you're on a corner property, it had to be on both roads, not just one of the 2 roads. And it had to be advertised back then in newspaper general circulation. Now we can do it on the website to do that. So you had the mail notice, the sign notice on the property, and the public notice is on the website or newspaper general circulation. So that way everybody got to know when the public hearing was going to be, who and where to call for information on the rezoning, and be able to talk to a planner for the impact that rezoning may have if you're in the adjacent property or live in the neighborhood.
Do either of you 2 have any different or add to that? All right, we're going to move on to, go ahead, yes.
I would just say that one of the first responsibilities under state law is the town of Vail would have to adopt a general plan. And that's where the committee would sit down and decide what kind of land use it wants, where it wanted to have public open space, what communities and neighborhoods should be rural or suburban in nature as opposed to urban, what areas should be developed for retail development. And it would go through the process that John's talked about with public input and discussion, and then the mayor and council would have to put that plan out for consideration.
Let me add on to that. Within, we call it a comprehensive land use plan, we call it a general plan. But within the plan, generally one of the things that's specified when a developer comes in to develop a decent sized community is the amount of public open space that must be there. And generally, counties have a lot lesser requirement than municipalities have. And I know when we incorporated, we doubled that amount. So as we were built out, we got double the park space that we would have had under a county code. And that's something that you would be able to do if you incorporated.
Maybe you know this, when you become a town, the county already has a zoning. Does that get grandfathered in? Is that the starting point?
It is. So all of the county zoning automatically transfers over to the new town, but the town then has the opportunity to revise or revisit that zoning through that general plan process. So for example, there is commercial property that was recently bought just east of Colossal Cave Road. That would come into the town of Vail with the zoning that's been assigned to it by the county, but the mayor and council would then have the opportunity to rezone that land and do that through a public process.
And there are no parks zoned in Vail right now. So you could add parks as part of the zone, right?
You could add parks, you could also protect open space. For instance, the headwater of Julian Wash could be protected as open space. Those are all decisions that would be in the hands of the residents of Vail and the mayor and council.
Wonderful. All right, this is about taxes. How is the tax base before and after incorporation in Weston, Florida? Like, did you want us to talk about it? Okay, all right. We'll pick you up on the next one, sorry. Well, it's a two-part question, too. We're looking for some insights into the specific taxes, like property taxes, and I know that Weston, Florida is a little bit different because you don't have an income tax in Florida, right? So it may all be different. But what happened with taxes in Weston, and then we'll kind of piggyback that onto what would happen here.
Weston, when we incorporated, had let me back up. The taxing scheme in Florida is different than the taxing scheme in Arizona. The primary source of revenue for local governments in Florida is property taxes. The primary source for local governments in Arizona is sales tax. So there's a difference. Is one scheme better than the other? It really doesn't pay the debate because we're not going to change it. But in Weston, as we're able to make the improvements, the property values grew, and we had a very limited amount of increases in what's called the ad valorem tax rate, which is the tax rate on property. We got state shared revenues, just like you do here, and having Disney World in the state of Florida was great because everybody got a piece of anybody who spent a dime at Disney. For that, but as we grew, as we got more businesses in, the tax base grew, and I will tell you that Weston incorporated in 1996, so we're 27 years old now. Still have the lowest ad valorem tax rate of the 31 municipalities in Broward County by a long shot, and I think a lot of that goes to the fact that we have the contract style of management and not have the burdens of retirement plans and things of the like, and benefits to do it.
One of the things that people ask, is there a benefit to a business? Is it more attractive for business to go to the county, or is it more attractive for business to go into the city? And does the city have any control over kind of directing which businesses they want to pursue?
You know, the way that municipalities control business is generally through zoning as to what type of business is permitted in what type of zoning district. As far as attracting business, that's a whole other story because business is going to come if they think they can make a profit. So you got to have the rooftops there, you got to have the people there who will potentially patronize the business. And you know, that gets a lot different now. You know, you've got a lot of open space. You could probably compete with other areas of Pima County for large employment bases, where you know whether it's in defense or other areas, which then would go to help the development of small business. But that's a strategy that you all need to sit down and determine what you want where. And again, part of it goes back to zoning, and then you take a look at it and you'll see how you're going to be able to attract small business and enhance the business base for the residents of Vail.
Either of you have any questions or comments on this? All right. One of the things, it bothers me. Other cities have so much more business in their cities. And because we're at the outskirts and people shop in Tucson, it doesn't seem like there's any upward pressure or anything to bring some of those businesses out to Vail. One of the things I use a dry cleaner, and I have to drive all the way into Tucson to use a dry cleaner. And I don't know why we don't have a dry cleaner here, and I didn't know if the town could help in that area or not. All right, yeah, go ahead.
You know, one of my background's in economic and community development, and we spent a lot of time trying to attract businesses into the UA Tech Park. And one of the things we learned is that businesses look for a streamlined process and certainty about what they can do in a given community. And when you don't have designated commercial areas, they don't know what the rules of business are. They're reluctant to come here. So I use the example, if you took any other community of 20 to 25,000 people and looked at it, it would have hotels, it would have local restaurants, it would have local businesses and so on. That's pretty much absent here in Vail, and I think part of the reason it is absent is because nobody knows what the rules of the game are. They don't know where to put their business, they don't know, what the regulatory process is going to be. By having a town, you provide certainty to those businesses, and that becomes attractive for bringing them into the community. And also, you can attract the kinds of businesses, you can target the kinds of businesses you want. Do you want big box, or do you want locally owned businesses? And do you want these kinds of employers versus those kinds of employers? So I think a very strong case could be made that it would be a positive step towards bringing additional amenities and business services into the region.
Thanks for that. All right, here we go. This is back in Weston. Was the community wrapped into the decision making as the town was formed?
The brief answer is yes. But we were fortunate in that we started out with a community development district prior to becoming a city. And briefly, community development districts, and you've got them in Arizona. I forget what you've got those community development districts that are primarily financing arms that they give a developer the ability to go out and get outside financing to design, construct, maintain, and operate a specific area and specific infrastructure within that area. So we had that. That's where I was elected to the Board of Supervisors of the Indian Trace Community Development District, which was the forerunner of the city. Now, what was the question before I got all that history there?
How did you wrap the community?
How do we wrap the community in there? We went out and just like you did, we created what was called the steering committee. And we had 10 people on the steering committee that came from all walks. We had people even from outside the city. We had a representative from the developer there. We had a person who was an assistant city manager from the city of Hollywood who was there. We had a number of residents on there, mostly residents. And we had public meetings, just like you had, and we put together a feasibility study, just like you all did. And we published the feasibility study, and we ultimately took a vote as to whether we should file a bill of incorporation
After
in the Florida legislature.
After it was formed, was the community much more engaged?
The community is very engaged because I'll tell you, our election was on September 2nd, 1996. Now, September 2nd, or September 3rd, I'm sorry. September 3rd was the day after Labor Day. Right? So people are just coming back from a holiday or from wherever. And it was the only thing on the ballot in Weston. There was no other county elections, no other state elections, no other federal elections, or anything else. It was the only election on that day. We had a 44% voter turnout, which is basically unheard of for that type of election. And of those people that were voting, 90% voted to incorporate. So then we had another election, okay, in April 1st, on April Fool's Day of 1997, because under Florida law, you couldn't create donuts. And by our incorporation in Weston, a donut was created in what was called the Bonaventure community. So our incorporation bill that went through the Florida legislature said that residents of the Bonaventure community on April 1st, 1997 would have to decide whether they wanted to go with the city of Sunrise to the north or join the new city of Weston. We went out to the community, went out to a number of homeowner associations, and on April 1st, on that evening, they had a 67% voter turnout in the Bonaventure community, and 66% of those voted to choose the new city of Weston versus the long-established city of Sunrise. So Yes, we went out, we got the community involved, and even once we got started, we didn't elect the first city commission until June 3rd of 1997, and then we really got rocking and rolling.
Thank you for that. So we actually have, and I don't know if this happens in Weston or not, but we have a large amount of people who live in the rural community that are wrapped into our incorporation act. And the rural people love their rural lifestyle, and they want to maintain their rural lifestyle. And I don't know if you have thoughts on this or not, maybe Bruce or Rob, but if the zoning is already set, what can a city do to help protect and maintain it? What is the impact of the city on rural lifestyles?
The short answer is if those people want their rural lifestyle preserved, and I'll assume that the elected officials will want to do what they want, you adopt a similar zoning district, plain and simple, that assures that they're done. And it's not a hard task at all.
Okay. All right. Do you have any follow-up, you two?
Well, I just say, I mean, that's exactly right. The community would have the opportunity to protect different kinds of zoning throughout the community. So if folks want to live in a rural setting, then the council could adopt zoning for that rural setting. Take, for example, folks want to live in communities like X9 or Pistol Hills, they could protect that lifestyle and that zoning under the general plan that the mayor and council would elect. I would just point out too, in this big area that's called Vail, there's about 32,000 square miles or acres, I'm sorry, of state lands. It's going to be critically important about how those state lands are zoned and what the land uses are. By being an incorporated city, you'll have an opportunity then to be jurisdictionally in negotiation with state lands for that kind of zoning and that kind of use. In the absence of the city, the state land department is going to make that decision itself.
In conjunction with the county.
That's right, in conjunction with King County.
And county's goals and objectives may be different than the town Vale's.
That's correct.
Okay, just make sure I tell you. All right, so I've got probably 10 or 15 more cards. We have like another half an hour. So I just want to point out to you that if we don't get to all these questions, we will get with John and the team and make sure that all these questions will be answered and put them on the website. But what I like to do is to try to go to short answers, all right? So 30 seconds, a minute max on these things, okay? And then we'll see how many we get through. All right. Does, quote unquote, we decide to grow include how land use is being developed? Yes. Would Vail contract out law enforcement like Weston, or is that a vote?
That's going to be up to the elected town council.
Okay. The feasibility study includes Rocking K and other opted-out communities. How will the tax deficit be addressed without these properties? Rob, you might want to address that one.
So the question relies on the amount of land that was in the original map. And for Rocky Cay, it was built on the 2020 census, and there are no houses and no residents in the Rocky Cay development. So having that pulled out really had no impact at all on our numbers. The other two smaller communities, Academy Village and Rincon Desert Estates, a lot of the residents in Academy Village are not registered voters or counted in their census. So I don't really have a good answer of how many people in Academy Village would have counted for in the original boundary versus the boundary held today. And then if you look at the Rincon Valley Estates, I think there's around 40 homes in there. So call it 100 people. So again, not a big impact. I also might add that from the time we started the feasibility study, we have the analysis tell us that there's 21,000 people within our boundary, and we don't have a current count, but we know there was over 15,370 registered voters, which would indicate that we're probably closer to 25,000 residents now. So in a year, we've changed quite a bit.
Let me add on to that, because one of the things that we did when after the we incorporated and the numbers we got from the census, because we didn't believe that, we thought those numbers were short. We went and we actually contracted with the Census Bureau to do a special census. We had to pay for it, but we ended up having 16,000 more people than the census told us that we had. And you can imagine, on a per capita basis, the increase in the revenue stream because of that. So those things you need to keep in mind, because those are doable actions.
Thanks for that. So one of the questions is about annexation. We talk about Tucson annexing into Vail, and it's true that the residents of Vail would have to say yes or no to that annexation if they own the property. But could you talk about that?
Yeah, so under annexation, it is the property owners in the annexed area who have the decision about whether it be annexed, and it's done in two different ways. It's not the voters at large, but the people that live within the proposed annexation area. So if the city can convince those property owners, those owning the property, to vote in favor of it, then it's going to be annexed.
If Tucson annexed the old Passages property, how many people would have to say yes or no to that?
One, the owner of that property at this point.
And is that even feasible?
Of course, absolutely.
So
that's the point, and the city of Tucson has made it very clear. Their primary interest is annexing property that has commercial and retail value, because that generates the sales tax, which provides more revenue for the city. They're less interested in annexing residential areas and housetops, because that's what creates demand for service and more expense. So if you'll note that right now the city of Tucson is approached along Interstate 10 between Houghton and Colossal Cave, and just a little bit over in one instance, because that's property that has commercial and retail value. The challenge for Vail is to try to make sure that it has the opportunity to grab areas that have commercial and retail value to create that same level of sales tax, but also to provide those amenities for the people of Vail.
did you have anything to follow up on that?
Yeah, just if you don't know, there are 3 parcels that are owned by the State Land Department that are being annexed by the city of Tucson as we speak. 2 of them are on Colossal Cave Road. One surrounds Acacia Elementary School in that property, right, vacant land around it. And another piece on the corner of Colossal Cave and I-10. And then there's a 3rd parcel over down by Houghton and the railroad tracks. And those, they've given them names, Gabriel, Jay, and Cody. So they've been very personalized, but they have one vote, and that's the State Land Department on whether those parcels are annexed into the city of Tucson.
I saw a memo that they started that process 2 or 3 years ago, and it predated incorporation by a long shot. All right. What do we want all the developments and businesses to build?
Seems to me that's a decision for the community, that once the town is incorporated and the mayor and council is elected and you start working on the general plan, there's going to have to be an effort to bring the community into a discussion and a dialogue about what it wants to be, what its character is, what kind of land uses it wants. That is a decision that then is made at the local level rather than at the state legislature or by the city of Tucson or by the Board of Supervisors of Pima County.
One thing about economic development, when you don't exist as an entity, there's no phone number to call. And in 2013, we had 2 businesses contact us, the incorporation committee, and said, we'd like to build in Vail. If you incorporate, we're going to build in Vail. And when it didn't pass, both of them built in a new ranch because there was nobody to answer the phone in Vail. So being incorporated, you now have a phone number and somebody that you can talk to.
Oh, here's a good one. What lessons were learned from incorporation of Weston, Miranda, and could you share that with the folks in Vail?
I think the answer is going to be the same whether it's Weston or Marana or Vail, that you control your destiny. And I know it's cliche to say that because I saw it on a sign and I saw it out there. But it's literally true that when I was on the Board of Supervisors in Weston, we, under state law, we didn't have planning and zoning authority. We didn't have financial authority to do police and fire and all that stuff. But yet people came to us because we were the closest government to them. And it pained us to tell them, you've got to go to the county. We don't have the authority under state law to deal with you. Once we got elected, they were a lot happier because we could do something. We were able to make change and make a better quality of life for them that matched the lifestyle that they came to the city to enjoy. And much like all of those who came to Vail, that there are some who enjoy their rural lifestyle, and that should be preserved, and there are some who like living in denser communities, and that should be preserved as well. Because if you're in a community where it's mostly, let's say, single story, and Pima County would allow your next door neighbor to build a second story on the house, you might not like that. But if you're here in Vail, you can take care of issues like that.
The other unique thing about cities compared to businesses is cities compete with each other, but they also cooperate with each other. John has already told us that he would share his third generation contract language with the town of Vail from Western Florida, correct?
Yes.
And Saurita, Marana, Oro Valley, we've met with all of them. They also are very willing to share contracts and staffing and zoning and any number of things because cities cooperate as much as they compete, unlike business might do.
All right, so Florida, like Arizona, has a large retirement population. How did incorporating impact the aging communities, and how did you balance the retirement community's needs among the services needed by others, such as young families?
Very good point. When I spoke earlier about the annexation of the Bonaventure community, that was primarily condominiums and senior citizens who were coming in to Weston. So we had a lot of new families coming in because they were all buying new homes in the community, and we had the senior citizens coming in. And both would come to the city commission meetings because the families were interested in parks. The folks in the condo area were interested in having their roads paved, and Weston is extremely heavily landscaped. The Bonaventure community didn't have the wide rights of ways that the developer built in the main part of Weston. But they wanted to look like us nonetheless, look like the rest of Weston nonetheless. And we worked with them. We went in and we developed what we call the Bonaventure Master Plan. With their input on what would be done, and we created the Bonaventure Development District, so there was a revenue stream for it, and we got everybody on board over a period of time, and again, all they said was they wanted to look like the rest of Weston, and a quick little funny story, so I don't take up your time too much, was Weston has a tremendous amount of royal palm trees, which you don't see out here, of course, but we probably have about as many royal palm trees as there are saguaro cacti out here. And there weren't too many royal palm trees in the Bonaventure community. They wanted royal palm trees. We went out and bought royal palm trees, mature royal palm trees, and the vocal senior citizens said, well, why do you have to buy such big ones? Weren't they expensive? I said, well, you wanted to look like us. So we did it. But nonetheless, we developed it. We took care of the community, improved the appearance of the community there. We built the parks out for the young families. We built what was, at the time, the largest municipal park in the county, which was 100 acres, which is nothing for municipal parks anymore. But had 8 soccer fields, 8 baseball fields, 8 basketball courts. We called it a field of 8s. It had skate park and everything else in there. So we listened to the people and balance it out and we accommodate. We do what they want. They're the bosses.
All right. Why would a community not want to incorporate? And would being a rural community be a driving factor not to incorporate? In other words, Is there a benefit, I guess the question is there a benefit for rural communities? Yeah, to not,
Is there a benefit to not being incorporated?
if you're rural.
Well, yeah, if you're rural, but, driving into Vail and looking right around this area, it doesn't appear that it's too rural anymore.
Well,
Look at
if
the
we go
rooftops.
farther north, you'll find a lot of rural communities.
Yeah, and that's fine, so you've got a mix, and then, if, I don't know where the benefit would be to remain unincorporated if you're gonna be a growing community. I mean, what was the population of Vail 10 years ago?
2020.
All right, 2000 was 2,400, okay. All right, and today it's 25,000. And where do you think you're gonna be in 10 years?
Well, I think the rural community would like to stay rural and not have a whole bunch of
And here's
houses.
something, there's no reason why they can't stay rural. Now, what can happen under any scenario, whether it's incorporated or unincorporated, somebody who's got a large tract of rural land
State land company,
can sell it to a developer
state land company.
who wants to build residential housing at 4 units per acre, 3.5 units per acre, or whatever. And it's gonna happen if they get the change of zoning. But again, they'd have to come in for change of zoning, which is part of a public process to do so.
Well, here in Pima County, there's 10 zoning commissioners that make that decision, and only one of them lives in the Vail area, and that person can be overridden by the needs of the greater Pima
Well,
County.
again, that was the issue that we had in Weston. At the time we incorporated, we had one member of the then 7-member Broward County Commission who lived in Weston, and he shortly moved out afterwards. So, local, the closer the better.
So, when it comes to zoning changes, I think there's some clarification. We stated tonight that Vail could change the zoning. Does that mean that it's the mayor and council that changes the zoning, or can the residents have input and say into how that zoning is changed?
I sit on the commission.
Well, ultimately, the mayor and council would have to adopt the general land use plan and to adopt the zoning for the town. But typically that process is a very interactive process in which there are hearings and meetings and input, and plans are drafted and then submitted to the town and the residents for comment and review, and it goes through a fairly engaged process. And I would assume that that would be the case here in Vail. And I guess the point I would make, and then going back to the rural areas of state land, you don't have that opportunity now. Those decisions are not made through that process. They're made by the property owner or by the existing zoning or by the state land department. By having a community, you would set up that process and you would have that dialogue and you would set the values and the kinds of zoning and development standards and guidelines that you want as a community. And I think that's the best protection for the rural areas, because the state land department, for example, their mandate is to get the highest and best economic use of that land. The city or the town can intervene in that process and negotiate for zoning for state land being put into public hands or into private hands. And that's where the city would have standing. Without a city or a town, you don't have that legal standing.
All right, hold that microphone. How does a person learn how to run for government in New Vail?
So this is really interesting. Cities and towns are governed under Chapter 9 of state Arizona revised statutes. And so the state prescribes that once a town incorporates, the Board of Supervisors are then required to appoint an interim town council, 7 members. And the state law doesn't prescribe how the Board of Supervisors, what the process is for doing that. We have suggested to the county that they would solicit interest from individuals who would like to serve on the mayor and county council. They submit their resume and their statement of qualifications, and there would be a process that would be clear and explicit about how those members were then selected for that interim mayor and council. That council will only serve until the first election, and at that point, people would run for mayor and council and would be elected in that process. The requirement is you have to be 18 years of age and you have to be a qualified elector that lives and resides within the boundaries of the town. And that's the way the process works at this point.
Has there been any commitment to anybody being on the council in the future?
No, not at this point. And in fact, I mean, there are no names before the board of supervisors. As I said, this week we asked them if they would provide us with the methodology that they're going to use to try to qualify and select those initial appointments to the mayor and council. And the council is elected at large, are being appointed at large, and they would then select the interim mayor as well.
What is it going to cost us to pay the salaries of the mayor and the secretary, or who would ever manage the money? If Vail were to incorporate, and what role will be played in Vail if incorporated? So basically, who determines the salary of the future mayor and council?
Well, first, even in a contract city, as John mentioned, you have, there are 10 people or 12 people, even in his city, and those tend to be the directors and the city or town manager. So you have sort of that executive level. But it's like any other job you get in the business. There's a competitive process. You have to compete on the employment market. And it's going to be done based on surveys that are done on wage analysis and compensation.
That's for the contractor. What about the mayor and council?
Well, the mayor, typically for a town this size, the mayor and council are volunteers, and they are not paid. That's true in Laurel Valley, Marana, and Southita right now. They are not paid.
But if they wanted to pay themselves, let's say $250,000 each, could they do it?
They wouldn't be reelected.
No, so those salaries and stuff would be submitted for a vote of the electors. Exactly. And I would just say that, I mean, there are sort of two requirements. You probably are going to have a city manager, and you're required by law to have a city attorney. The attorney could also be contracted out. It doesn't necessarily have to be an employee of the city or the town of Vail. And to Rob's point, you know, there are competitive salaries for those kinds of positions across various towns and cities. You would have to be competitive with your salary ranges to attract the right type of people with the right background and experience for that job.
Okay, this is a question for you. It's a very, very good question. So, as you heard, the city of Tucson keeps annexing out into areas that we would call Vail. And 3 of them are under consideration right now. And did you encounter that where you were in Weston? In other words, was there a city that was trying to encroach into you? And after you incorporated, were you able to negotiate to reclaim some of those lands?
As I said earlier, we were confronted with the donut hole state statute. So the neighbors either had to go with Sunrise or had to come with us. Now, one of the things we did encounter on the far western edge of Weston is the Everglades, literally. And let me tell you, we had the biggest mosquitoes. They all had names plastered on the side. But so there was a town that came along after us. It was in south of us called Southwest Ranches. And when they were incorporated, they were contemplating coming up the west side of Weston, which there was no commercial value to it. And we said no, so we ended up annexing out into the Everglades, which brought us no benefit whatsoever, but just kept the neighboring town from being on our western flank. And there could never have been any commercial value along US 27, which borders the Everglades. So, and like I said, cities get along with each other, but they're also competitors. And when it comes to annexation issues and land issues, we're going to be competitors, and we're going to be very fierce about it to protect our turf and protect what's in the best interest of our residents.
Did you have any follow-up comments on that? So it sounds like if you are a town, you can protect adjacent properties that are not in the city of Tucson. That you can say, well, we're going to annex into Vail, even just for the point of protecting it to make sure that nobody else gets it. Interesting. All right, in evaluating competitive bids, this is back to you. So obviously, the town of Vail is not automatically going to a competitive bid contract. And that would be up to a future mayor of town. But let's say it did do a contract type of thing like you did in Weston. Was there any concern for paying your employees a living wage and making sure they have health benefits?
When you put things out to bid, you can put whatever specifications you want in there. And one example I'll give is that early on we had one service provider that ultimately we couldn't arrive at an agreement to renew the contract. So we ended up putting the contract out to bid, but we wanted to keep all of that service provider staffing that were currently in Weston, just try to keep them. So when we put out the solicitation for those services, and these were finance and administrative services, we put in what the current benefits were for all that staffing and said that the proposers had to at least match that as a minimum. They could exceed it if they wanted to, but at least match that. And in that respect, we were protecting those people who literally answered the phone at City Hall in Weston, so that they could go home at night not thinking that, well, as soon as the bid comes in, I'm out of a job, I'm going to start looking out of a job. So we would take care of that. Now, when you get into things like landscaping contracts, you can put in there whatever you want to put in there. But keep in mind, the more you put in there, the more expensive those contracts are going to be. Generally, what you want to do is say, look, I want the lawn mowed. You don't have lawn here. Crazy. I want the rocks raked, 42 times a year, okay? And I'm not going to tell you, I'm going to tell you how the appearance you want, but I'm not going to tell you how to do it. And it's the same thing when you hire somebody, for your home. You tell them, you want your home painted, you want it this color, you want this quality of paint, but you don't tell them how to paint the house. That comes with the contract. So you can put in as much as you want or as little as you want, but and also it depends what you're contracting for.
All right, we're getting closer. So in developing our boundary, we included a lot of rural areas. And there are some people in the rural areas that feel as if they were not included in developing the boundary. So how can they be involved moving forward in the process?
Well, we started out looking at 57 identifiable neighborhoods in what we call the Vail area of interest. It ran all the way from basically the Kankakee Valley all the way down to Corona de Tucson and all the way along the western boundaries of the city of Tucson. We then invited all those neighborhoods to participate last summer in a series of meetings and solicited their input and their interest, and we said to them, engage with us in that process. Under state law, however, there are only two ways in which you can opt out legally, and one of those is if you are what's called under declarant control. That is, you're a master plan developer and you still control that development and its streets and its commonly owned properties. Or if you are an HOA that's organized and has a board of directors that can express their desire to not be part of it. And we honored that process because two HOAs asked us not to include them, and one declarant, Rocky K, because of their previous development agreement with the county, chose to opt out at this point. There is no prescribed process for dealing with individual property owners and property owners that don't come forward as an HOA. I would suggest to you, though, that the best protection you have in those areas is to have an incorporated town that's going to take care of, as we've said before, maintaining your lifestyle and the kind of zoning you want for your neighborhood. That's the best protection you have. You don't have any additional protection under the county right now, other than the fact that there's just broad zoning across the county for certain things. So it's kind of a tough question to answer, and we did not have a mechanism under state law that could have allowed us to exempt individual property owners in rural areas from the process. we tried to draw the boundaries as best we could based upon communities of interest and neighborhood identities.
All right. Is it fair to compare Weston, Florida with Vail, Arizona? As a state, Florida had a much higher influx of people from a higher dollar per capita than Arizona. Florida people from New York, Pennsylvania, the entire Northeast, versus Vail, who is people from California, Washington, Oregon, etc. So, I guess I'll answer this. I think you understand what happened in Weston. You know what's going on in Vail. We're not saying that it's a one-on-one comparison. I think what we're trying to do is provide you an experience of what happened in Weston. And if you take nothing away from that, that's okay. But I think there may be some similarity of what happened there to what could potentially happen there. All right. Where's Mariko? So you all noticed that we're missing somebody on the stage. It's Mariko Tippett. He is the vice president of Corporate Vail. His mother had surgery, so he's there taking care. How do we know that your signs are legal? You should know that anything going forward, now that it is a valid, well, here, you can answer that. Or Rob, yeah.
So under state statute, once you have an election, you have 71 days prior to the election that you can post signs. And there are requirements on the size of the signs, where they're placed. Certainly it has to be in right-of-ways. It can't be on state right-of-way, state highway right-of-ways. They also have to include the owner of the sign. And if you spend more than $1,000, it has to be under a registered PAC.
And I would just say we meet all those requirements at this point.
Yeah. And today is the 71 days before November 7th. So there were signs erected today. And once you say vote, that's an election sign. If you say love, that's not an election sign.
Okay. We have one last question, unless there's more that have come in. I don't know if there's more that have come in. All right. So the petition that was circulated did not include the boundary description or map of it. Where is it? Why wasn't it attached?
I don't believe that's true. I think every petition circulator carried with them a copy of the meets and bounds and the boundaries, and they were available for inspection by anybody signing the petitions. And when we turn the petition,
We're not.
excuse me, when we turn those
We're
petitions,
not.
so when we,
If you're gonna get up there and say something, say it correctly. No, it was not. We asked multiple times, including your signers over at Walmart that were not even in Vail. They told us they didn't have to, they weren't going to, just some. So no, you're sitting up there lying, this is actually being broadcast live.
I appreciate your comment very much, but I can tell you that every single petition had stapled to it a meets and bounds, and when that was brought to the county election official, they had to verify that it was stapled to the election, and if it looked like it had been re-stapled, they would have taken it out. And you are just creating dissension and doubt that is not true. I'm so sorry, but you don't. If you think we're lying, then you need to tell the state or the county election officials who verified the election that they
lied to me multiple times. You personally. You're cherry picking questions. We're broadcasting.
I'm not cherry picking questions.
We are broadcasting this live, so you know. You are cherry picking questions. People are asking questions online, and you are cherry picking.
I answered every question.
Except you told me that you had nothing to do with any of this agency, that you knew nothing about any of it, but yet you, with the attorney's office, you've been in meetings with them for years on these things.
Okay, so I tell you, we didn't start this organization until a year ago.
Okay, so-
And the annexation was 2 years before that, and I appreciate that. Listen, we're running out of time. Most of you have been so wonderfully attended to this. Would you please give a hand to Mr. John? All of this will be on the website. so much for coming out. And I really apologize that there was a lot of animosity, there's a lot of anger in the community, but we are trying to do our best to answer and to present the information. We don't want to disenfranchise you by giving you wrong information. We can't say that for everybody. All right, hey, thanks so much. Come to our next one. We have three more that are happening September 11th, September 25th, and October 10th, right here. You don't want to miss it. Some good speakers.